Bad omen, great omen, twilight omen.
What are the secrets? They are here now, and they are just so ominous. This is the story of the ominous events. It was a bright summer morning, and a patrol group of pillagers were searching the land for villagers. They had done this for countless years, and that day was like every other. But early that morning, it began to rain very heavily, and it just wasn't stopping. It was only getting worse, and so that patrol group sought shelter within a cave. The storm was only getting worse, but thankfully, they were safe from the downpour, as they had that cave. But after a while of just standing there, waiting for the storm to be over, they got, well, bored. And so they made the foolish decision to walk away from the cave entrance and explore deeper into the depths of that cave. But while exploring the dark depths of that cave, they came across bricks. That was odd. There appeared to be a structure of sorts here, and so the pillagers retrieved their pickaxes and they mined into that structure, intrigued at what this could possibly be. And with that, they entered the trial chambers. This place was fascinating. The architecture here was just astounding, and this chamber was lit up by technology that they had never even heard of. And so, they began to explore that chamber. But once they entered a new room, a strange mechanical sound reverberated through the chamber, and with that, hordes of mobs were summoned. There were bogged, and zombies, and slimes, and even the mighty subscribe button. Rather quickly, they all turned to face the group of pillagers, and with that, they were aggravated, and so, the battle began. The pillagers took to the challenge, drawing their crossbows and launching their arrows. The slimes were easy to kill, but for each one that died, a set of new smaller slimes would rise from the dead and would attempt to get revenge, but they did very little damage. Now, the bogged, well, they attempted to shoot the pillagers with their arrows of poison, but thankfully, the pillagers were able to dodge. And finally, the zombies, well, they charged right for them, their arms reaching out, ready to attack. But luckily, the pillagers were strong, and so they persevered, and they fought off all of those adversaries, and won the battle without taking any damage. They heard a chime, and then from these strange spawners that dotted the room, rewards were given out. And those spawners, well, they were now on cooldown, as they were shut down in a way. That was interesting. These clearly weren't normal spawners, as no regular monster spawner would ever go on a cooldown. So these trial spawners here, well, they must be custom made. And given their ability to summon all these mobs and then go into this cooldown state, as well as the fact that this room was set out to be like some sort of battleground, it all hinted to the pillagers that this was some sort of training room? That was odd. Who would be training here? The pillagers wanted to know if that was actually the purpose of this chamber, and so they ventured out of that room and over to the next. And well, it was the same thing. Mobs were spawned from those special trial spawners, and the room was set up like a battleground. So again, the pillagers took to the challenge, and just like last time, they won with ease, and rewards were gifted. This was definitely a training ground, but just to be certain, they entered the third room. Now this third room was again a battleground, but something was slightly different, as this room spawned a brand new mob that they had never seen before. It was the Breeze. But still, despite the new challenges of the Breeze, they won the battle, and more rewards were given. This was really weird. Why did this place exist? But still, they liked it. The training was fun, and so they made the decision to remain within the chambers for the next few days, as they wanted to train here, and thus they ventured into all the rooms and challenged all the mobs here in an attempt to get all the training that was possible. Now, that training allowed them to get a lot of loot, particularly when they opened these vaults with some special keys that the spawners dropped on occasion. This place was very interesting. The technology and the magic that was used to operate the chamber, well, was truly fascinating to the villagers, as they had never seen anything like it before. But still, they carried on with their training, returning to the different rooms once the spawner's cooldown was over. And during their training, they attempted to learn as much as they possibly could about this place. But eventually, they did get a little bored, as they understood all there was to learn about this place, and the trials were getting far too easy, as after all the pillagers were just too skilled to be dealing with these caliber of mobs. They were just better than them. But they had a plan to change that, and to make these trials an actual challenge. And so, using a complex set of spells that drained them almost to the point of death, they called upon the souls of the land, particularly the hate-filled souls, the ones that had experienced the most pain and suffering within their lives, and they set them free into the chambers. And it worked, as that spell created the ominous spawners, as those trial spawners were suddenly filled with the souls that represented pure hate and power. And so the mobs that were now expelled from them were far stronger, and they posed a much greater threat, as each of those mobs was fueled by a soul of raw hate. But there weren't just negatives to that spell, as the rewards from those battles were better as well, as the pure hate within those souls granted a great level of strength to the rewards. Also, the vaults were not free from these hate-filled souls, as they too were mutated by the raw hate of the souls, and thus the ominous vaults were created. Now, the keys shot from the ominous spawners were mutated because of the hate, but they were mutated in such a way that they could free the souls from the ominous vaults, and thus, as a reward for being freed, the souls was allowed rewards to be dispensed that were far more powerful than any normal vault. It was great. Now, the pillagers didn't really care about the pain and suffering that they were inflicting onto those souls, as they finally had a difficult challenge to pursue, and they loved it. The torment of others was just not a consideration to them, and so they took to that challenge, and they fought that ominous event in the chambers. And because of that, they were able to get some very powerful items. But after some time, the ominous trial spawners reverted back to their normal state. The vault stayed ominous though. Now the pillagers wanted to bring back the ominous state to all the spawners, as without those keys from the ominous spawners, the ominous vaults were impossible to access, and so all the great loot within was therefore unobtainable. Also, the far greater challenge was actually enjoyable to those pillagers when they fought against those ominous spawners, and so the pillagers thought about it. What could they do to bring back the ominous state to the chambers in a more stable manner? They didn't want to have to cast spells, summoning souls, and infusing them into the spawners for every single battle. That was too much work, and it was far too draining for them. They needed something else, and so they thought about it, and they thought about it, until one of them had an idea. What if they infused some of the concentrated pure hate within their souls into consumable bottles that, when drunk, would destabilize the world and force a bad omen to be drawn out from the very fabric of the world? So then if they went near the trial spawners, the omen would be realized, as the spawners would turn ominous, as the tormented souls from that omen would attach themselves to those spawners and corrupt them. Yes, that might work. And so they tried it out, and that plan, well, it actually succeeded. Those bottles allowed the bad omen to be achieved, and so they called those bottles of pure hate ominous bottles, since after all, they were used to make the spawners ominous. Now whenever one of those ominous bottles was consumed, the pillagers felt drawn to the bad omen. They called this sensation the trail omen, and it was like a compulsion from them. The hate from the souls were calling out to them, kind of like the subscribe button calling out to you. But anyways, that wasn't too important. What truly mattered was achieving the ominous state within the chambers, which, thanks to those ominous bottles, was now very easy to do, as the pillagers were able to make many of those ominous bottles with relative ease. They also made different levels of them too, depending on how strong they wanted the bad omen to be, which would affect the difficulty of the challenge. It was a fantastic item. Now, the pillagers stored most of these ominous bottles within their inventory, but They did make quite a lot of them, and so numerous ominous bottles were also stored within the vaults and the spawners themselves. That way, whenever the pillagers won a trial, there was a chance that they could get another bottle, and with that, they would be able to do another ominous trial without even having to create another bottle. It was just a simple way of holding the bottles. Now, they really did enjoy those trials, especially the ominous part. But still, they far more loved to attack the villagers. There was just a special place within their hate-filled hearts for causing immeasurable pain to the villagers, and they just needed to satiate that. And so eventually they decided to leave the chambers. But before they did that, they left behind a few murals to all the mobs that they fought, just as a show of respect to the chambers. And then they exited. Now, due to the great curse of the chambers, a change in one affects all others. So those ominous bottles, well, they went out in chambers all across the world, and thus anyone else could, in theory, make a trial spawner ominous if they were able to win one of those ominous bottles and then consumed it. And those murals, well, they were also in chambers all across the world, just like the bottles. Now when the pillagers returned to their patrol, one of the pillagers decided to drink one of those ominous bottles near a village, just to, you know, see what would happen. As it turns out, the pure hate and rage was so strong that the bad omen would create a rift in the very fabric of the overworld, as illagers would then be drawn in and teleported from across the world to that village. This feeling of hate and rage near a village after an ominous bottle was drunk soon became known as the Raid Omen, and the events that would shortly follow that were known as the Raids. The power of those bottles was great. They could be used to destroy any village through the raids, and thus, patrol leaders all over the world were given those bottles to hand, so that whenever they found a village, they could easily summon reinforcements and raid that village simply by just drinking that bottle. And so millions of ominous bottles were spread across the world to all patrol leaders, and the effects that the ominous bottles have on the world are felt today very frequently as the raids rage on. So that's the story. It was a tale of great suffering. Except, that's not quite the end of this story. There is one more thing to mention. One rainy night, a pillager drank one of those bottles by accident, thinking that it was a potion of night vision, and so unexpectedly, hate began to fill his heart. But he was nowhere near a village, and so the bad omen began to do very strange things to him. And so to release his hate and rage that was suddenly building up within him, that pillager started to run, and in his omen-filled state, he killed a zombie out of frustration. But the death of that zombie then allowed for the hostile mob cap to no longer be filled, and thus a new zombie would be created by a spawner not too far away, just a few seconds later. And that zombie would go on to do, well, ominous things. However, to learn what happens next, you'll need to watch this video.